This is the Yak-3U, and despite its annoying matchmaker, it's a force to be reckoned with, especially at lower altitudes. The Yak-3U is a rank 5, battle rating 5.7 fighter for Russia, and it's really sort of a hybrid between a Yak-3 and an LA-7. You might have noticed the nose looks more like an LA-5 or LA-7, and that's because this plane actually has an M82 radial engine instead of the traditional V configuration engine like the rest of the other planes in the Yakovlev line. Now, what does that mean for performance? This engine allows for some pretty impressive speeds and extremely impressive climb rate at low altitude. And when I say low altitude, I'm talking about 2,500 meters and below. The closer to the ground, the better this plane performs, which provides for a playstyle that takes some adjustment, or at least it did for me. But of course, that's coming from someone who mainly plays jets, so it might be easier for you. Before we get into my playstyle with this plane though, let's get the rest of the important characteristics out of the way. So I mentioned that it's pretty fast, but how fast is it actually? At low altitude with WEP on, this thing can cruise within 30 or 40 kilometers of its redline speed, which admittedly isn't a very high redline speed, but the fact it can cruise so close to that redline speed under its own power is pretty impressive. I want to say that redline speed is roughly 660 kilometers an hour, give or take of course. Also, this thing will tear its wings off at about 700 kilometers an hour, so the fact it can fly level and be within 60 to 70 kilometers an hour of its rip speed is very, very impressive. Keep in mind, these numbers that I'm throwing around right now are all just from my anecdotal experience. It's not really like I haven't gone out and tested all of these speeds. Just relaying what I can from the matches I played in this. Feel free to drop the exact numbers in the comments if you know them, because I don't feel like testing it, to be honest. Other than the great speed and climb rate, this plane does turn decently well. In my experience, outturning most US planes is pretty normal, those mainly being P-51s, F-2Gs, and other Corsairs, so those are pretty easy to deal with as long as you're engaging only one or two at a time. Other aircraft that you can't outturn include a lot of Japanese planes, of course, and also Spitfires, though the Spitfires are much easier to deal with in my opinion. Things tend to change when you attempt to fight at higher altitudes. First off, it's more difficult to get into position early game because above 3,000 meters, just about everything begins to outclimb you despite the Yak-9U's insane performance below that. Also, did I mention you can't use WEP above roughly 4 kilometers? So that's a contributing factor to this plane's lacking high altitude performance. Generally speaking, the high altitude performance of the Yak-3U isn't great at all really. And frankly, I try to avoid fights period above 3K unless I know that I have a superior energy state relative to my opponent. There are a couple of planes that really give me trouble, but the main one is the Ki-84. It's kind of hard to capitalize on the Ki-84's weaknesses because I've never played it, so I don't really know what its weaknesses are, or if it has any that the Yak-3U could easily take advantage of. In all of the games I've played, I think I've been killed by the Ki-84 far more than anything else. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to say when it comes to flight performance, so how exactly is the Yak-3U meant to be flown? So the most effective way I found was to get the enemy team down low if possible. Unfortunately, not everyone tunnel visions enough to follow a low altitude menace down to the deck, so getting those fights started can be a bit tricky if you want to be at an advantageous altitude. Sometimes the opposing team wouldn't climb, which if that was the case, the game was pretty easy, but most of the time teams would climb and then I would basically have to wait until both teams begin to fight, which most of the time that means the mass of players slowly moves downwards, and that is where you want to be. Also, usually if I could manage to bait a single player slowly down to the deck, that would usually end pretty well too, even if my opponent started above and behind me. Oh yeah, this completely slipped my mind earlier talking about the plane itself, but I wanted to bring up the guns. It has two B-20S 20mm cannons on it, and frankly they're kind of subpar. And one thing I noticed with this plane, I don't know if it was just client side, like I don't know if this is just something going on with my game, but for some reason, every time I would try and change the ammo to something else, like I would try and use Universal for example. For some reason, after the game I used it with Universal, it would automatically switch back to Stealth, and that was super infuriating because I could never remember to change it back. I don't really know what was going on with that, but that's just, you know, a really minor complaint, something going on with the game, just a bug, but whatever. Alright, let's get into a match. So starting this game off, I find myself above and in front of a B-17, so I figure I might as well go ahead and take him out so I'm not chasing him at the end of the match. Luckily I don't take any damage from him, and then I look to my right and notice a bunch of Spitfires above me to my right, so I figure I'm gonna wait a second and see if they drop down and start fighting some of my teammates. This is why you don't see me climbing straight towards them. I wasn't sure if the Spitfire closest to me had his eyes set on me or not, so I decided to start climbing away and waiting to see what he does. Honestly, I think he was trying to decide whether or not he wanted to attack me because it looked like he sort of turned left when he saw me climbing away from him. So I decided to turn back around and try and reassess the situation, but as soon as I did that, it looks like he turned right towards me. During this game, I wasn't that experienced with the Yak-3U, so I kinda wasn't sure about taking this fight with the Spitfire. After all, he did have an altitude advantage over me. I was really hoping these 3 teammates near me were gonna try and help me out, but it looks like 3 of them are trying to attack the same B-17. For why? I don't know. So it looks like I'm kinda stuck with this Spitfire, and it looks like he has it out for me. After all, I am the highest one on my team, therefore likely the biggest threat to their team. Anyway, I got kinda bored of running away, so I decided to put my nose under him and see if I can bait him down to lower altitude. After all, that's where this thing shines. And it looks like he's gonna take the bait. So we're getting down to a lower altitude now, and it seems like he still wants to smoke. And now we're also moving into some clouds, so if I turn around in these clouds and start maneuvering, he's gonna have a hard time seeing where I'm going or where I even went if my name tag disappears for him. After I get under these clouds, I'm thinking, okay, the Spitfire probably can't see me, and he doesn't know exactly where I'm going, so I look at the Spitfire below me and think, okay, I might be able to take this guy out real quick. Try taking a very poorly set up shot, and of course I miss, and then take a look behind me to see if that other Spitfire is in hot pursuit, and of course he is. And now I'm thinking to myself, okay, wow, I'm a complete moron. Why did I put myself in this situation? Because at this point now there's a Corsair below me who, not gonna catch me, but he is still there and isn't too far behind either. So now I'm just trying to get this Spitfire a little bit closer before I start maneuvering, of course while trying to stay out of his guns. Once I feel he's close enough for me to start moving, I try and take it up and do a spiral climb. Honestly, it's a pretty poorly executed energy trap, but it does end up working out. Thanks to this thing's insane engine power, I'm going to be able to turn it over on him. Get those flaps out to try and keep my turning circle tight, and now the turns have tabled. Because now I'm on the Spitfire's tail instead of him being on me. And now another Spitfire enters the fight, and I'm in a pretty good spot right now because I'm at a higher energy state than both of these guys, and I have an extremely good climb rate at these lower altitudes. And now if I play my cards right, I'll have both of these guys in an energy trap. I kind of end up in the clouds here for a second, so I sort of lose track of where this Spitfire closest to me went, but as soon as I pop my head back out of the clouds, I see he's right in front of me. And now I'm going to take some very bad shots and waste all my ammo, so feel free to make fun of me if you want. And then my brain kicks in and then waits to take the final shot on him to secure the kill. And now, gotta take care of the other Spitfire. Consider taking a couple head-on shots here, but I don't need to do that considering my ammo count, so I take it into the vertical. Once again gonna put it in a spiral climb, but he doesn't follow because he probably knows what's gonna happen. So I put my nose down, get on his tail, realize he's pretty slow actually, and start lining up a shot. And that's how you run a 1v2 versus 2 Spitfires in the Yak-3U. So now there's only 2 players left on the enemy team, and luckily my team takes them out before I run back to base and leave the game. Because frankly, that's kinda what I do now. I get so bored trying to chase people around. But we win the game, and to most people that's what matters, so yay. Okay, so to summarize the Yak-3U, below 3K, maybe even 2K, this thing is absolutely nuts. It's got crazy good engine power, and you can outclimb everything if you're below that 3-kilometer threshold. Which this low altitude performance is sort of one of its downfalls as well. If you go above that threshold, good luck dogfighting just about anything. If possible, I try and avoid pretty much every fight at all above 3 kilometers. I always try my best to bait the enemy team down low, but a lot of times it doesn't work and I kinda end up boned. But there are times that it does work and then it usually turns out pretty well. I guess you could go after all the USA ground pounders if you really wanted to, and I imagine you could rack up some kills that way, but that may not be the most fun way to play the game. At least to me it wouldn't be. Alright, what do you think of the Yak-3U? Do you think this is the best plane at low altitude? Let me know in the comments. Alright, that's gonna be it for me today. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.